Hey everyone, welcome back to Platinum Off-Road. In this video, we're going to focus on the heater kit for the ROXOR. Now, this is a kit that we've been waiting for in anticipation because of the fact that it's pretty cold out here at this time. So the client brought us this kit that he got from dirtlegal.com, and we're going to go over the product itself. We're going to show you some of the options that you can choose there at dirtlegal.com and when you're ordering your kit. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to integrate certain components with the install for what the client's looking for his ROXOR. So let's go ahead and focus on the kit itself. Now, this is what they call the Gen 2 kit, and what that means is that you're going to have more options for your where the air is going to go. That being, you can choose under the dash, you can choose through the dash, which we don't have featured in this video. However, you can also go with the defrost duct. So if you look on the actual heater unit itself, you're going to see that you've got two out ports. Then this is going to be where the air comes from the blower motor through the heater core and then out through the ducts, heading to either both defrost or what you have under the dash, or even through the dash. Supplied with your kit is flex hose, and we're going to get a little creative with this install, I think, and how we're going to integrate perhaps even both the under the dash as well as the defrost ducts for the client. And so you've got some flex hose to work with. I don't know the length, if it's going to fit your project for what you're doing. This should be fine if you're doing one or the other option. However, I think we're going to try to get additional and see if we can't get something to where we can integrate the under the dash as well as the defrost duct. With this, you're going to have plenty of flex line, soft line for your actual coolant to run through. And this way you can go with an option with an EGR delete, or you can choose to keep your EGR system with this kit. So let's talk about that EGR system. Now, we are going to be doing the block off plates for the EGR delete. When you're ordering your kit, you can choose a two-way or a four-way valve. What this valve is designed to do is to restrict the coolant flow coming into your heater core and essentially dropping the temperature of the heater core at any given time. So as the air passing by it is going past the heater core, when you reduce that coolant flow, you're actually reducing the temperature over time. And as you increase it, you're increasing the temperature over time. Now, if you notice, if you completely block off that coolant through a two-way port, you're going to be shutting off any coolant that's going to try to get to the EGR system. So that's why you need to go with the four-way valve system. When you're ordering your kit, make sure that if you're running the EGR system, you need to get the four-way valve. And vice versa. If you're going with an EGR delete, go ahead and grab that two-way valve option. Finally, your switches. It's pretty basic. You've got a fan speed, and then you've got a temp control. Now, you can choose to whether or not you can mount this under the dash. For simplicity, the switch housing does come with two holes, or you can try to perhaps pull off the actual knobs, unscrew the retainer cap nut, and then drill holes in your dash to where you can integrate the switches directly into your dash. Just depends on how creative and how much time you want to put into it for yourself. Aside from that, you've got your basic fittings that are going to go to the heater core coming through the dash. These will come off of the heater core, and then you're going to route the soft hose through the dash. There are a number of hose clamps as well as grommets that'll help you break through that dash and not worry about running any bare metal or any cut metal on the actual soft line for your coolant hose. And so with this kit, you will still have a little bit of freedom to do some things that you want to do for your personal setup. However, they give you plenty of options to go with and plenty of supplies to go with. So let's go ahead and get over to the ROXOR and we'll start on the install. Now, the first step you're going to want to do is getting the actual heater unit mounted up to the firewall. This will be your blower and heater core all together. It's going to be fitting just up underneath the existing factory grommets in here. This is a little bit of a tight fit. Some of the wires coming into the gauges are just on top of that blower motor unit, so you're going to need to push up just a little bit, and making sure you find a nice, tight, snug spot to get this thing mounted. Now, in order to mark our holes, we're going to go ahead and tape this off with masking tape. We're going to use painter's tape so that way we can mark these holes and they're pretty visible, and we'll get these drilled out. to note that it was very difficult to get to the upper mounting hole on the driver's side up here. So what we did is we went ahead and found the perimeter of the actual mounting plate, and we drew out very closely, and we actually marked the perimeter of that. So we were able to get the passenger upper in there pretty well. So we're going to go ahead and drill that one out, and then we're going to measure off depending on the corner and the placement of the hole on that corner that we marked off. And we're going to see if we can't measure all this out, just make sure it's squared up pretty well with the other mounting holes, and get this one drilled over here. The reason with that was because on the back side of this unit, you can't get to this hole over here with the marker. So we went ahead and, like I said, we etched out the perimeter of it, and we'll make sure to drill out this upper passenger hole first, and then we'll focus on getting this one measured out. Make sure again that it's true with all the other holes, and then we'll give it a drill once we get everything pre-checked and measured out well. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys just for a little moment about what we did here to get this final hole drilled. I think towards the end of the project, we're going to probably be able to tell you that this is one of the most difficult parts of the install, was getting this unit mounted. Now, what we did is we were able to find, if you look through here down to that hole, we were obviously talking earlier that we're not able to get a Sharpie. So we went ahead and we drew out the perimeter of that unit, of the mounting plate, and we did all the measurements and checked everything out. And we were pretty happy with where we were going to set, but honestly, I just didn't feel confident that when we go to drill that hole, it was going to be exactly where we needed it. This being the final hole, it had to be just about perfect. So we walked around the shop and we were able to find a long rod. Now this is just a grease zerk extension, or a grease gun extension for a needle style grease zerk fitting. And we were able to slip it between the body and the control housing, the control wire housing of the unit. And we were able to go ahead and get it through there and get through that hole. And so if you can find yourself a rod or something convenient, that would be helpful, and getting that marked. So now that we have it all drilled, we're going to go ahead and get this bolted up. If you've got an extra set of hands, our kit came with a set of looks like quarter 20 hardware, and we're going to use these to bolt them through the firewall. And if you've got an extra set of hands, we're going to go ahead and have someone on the backside hold the nuts while we turn down on these and get them tightened down. Okay everyone, so the difficult part of this whole deal was actually accessing the upper hole on the driver's side. Now on the engine side of the firewall, what we noticed was that the actual vacuum line going for the brake booster crosses over right where this hole's going. So we didn't want to put the bolt going through the firewall from the interior to the exterior, because that bolt was lining up just right at where that vacuum line is at. And as the vehicle goes over bumps and different terrain, it will wear through over time and eventually losing his power booster for the brakes. So we wanted to make sure that all the bolts were coming from the engine compartment side through the firewall coming in. So like I said, the most difficult part was accessing that driver upper, and we tried a couple different techniques. We ended up using a short socket with a little quarter drive extension, and we were able to slide that right through that little canal, the same canal that we had to slide that skinny rod to mark the hole, and go ahead and get on that socket. It was difficult. It took us a few different tries to figure that out for us, but once we got it in there and our friend on the other side was holding down, we went ahead and ratcheted it down and put a good tension on it. So that will be a difficult task. Hopefully we were able to take some of the challenge out of it and just get straight to the punch. If you're working with the nut and bolt assembly and you want to avoid that vacuum line going to the brake booster, send your bolts coming in, but use yourself a quarter drive extension and a short socket so you can get up in that little canal. So on this next step, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and drill the holes for the soft line that's going to leave from the heater core coming through the firewall. What these lines are going to do is it's going to allow for the supply coming to the heater core and then the return coming back into your system. Now, one of these lines is going to be plumbed in just before the EGR, and then if you're doing an EGR delete, then here in a little later, we're going to end up showing you what we are going to come up with, so that way you can go ahead and put in that two-way valve and go ahead and bypass all these extra loops in the soft line, the factory soft line, and getting back up here to the front of the block. But for now, let's go ahead and focus on these grommets that we're going to put in. To get started with, they mentioned we're going to drill out 1/4 inch holes. Now these are going to be 2.5 inches apart. For aesthetics, it's nice to go ahead and put these on the same plane as the factory grommets that are there above what is now where the blower motor is on the inside. So what we did, a helpful tip you might use is try to eyeball a sight line using some painter's tape. Come across, cut those existing grommets in half so that way you can find the center radius point, and then carry that through, kind of stand off to the front and eyeball that through so that way you can fit on that plane and have that nice aesthetic look. So we're going to get started on the drill. We're going to go ahead and first, we've measured these out, get a center punch on it. With the initial pilot hole drilled, we're going to go ahead and switch over to a hole saw. Now this is a 1 1/4 hole saw. If you compare it with the grommet, you're going to see that this fits pretty well with the diameter of that grommet. Let's go ahead and get that going. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get these cleaned up and ready for the rubber grommet fitment. So just get you a file, one that has a curved end if you have one. Just go down to a local hardware store, and I'm sure you can grab one pretty cheap if you don't have one already. You can see we're dealing with some of the liner on the inside, and you can go in there and you can hit it with a razor knife and get some of that to go away before putting in these grommets. So we're going to go ahead and get that cut out, and then we'll get these fitted. Quick trick to this, if you want, you can go ahead and kind of fold this up kind of like a taco, and you're going to set that ridge, the crest right there, go ahead and set it on one end, and then you'll have to push and work it in around as you go. Okay, so we're back under the dash, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and get these elbows ready that were supplied in the kit. We're going to go ahead and pull the caps off of the heater core itself. Now this is a little pressurized system, so when you're initially pulling these off, go ahead and take them off a little slow. You'll hear the air kind of gasping through, and nothing's going to really happen. It's just going to pss, and nothing more than that. So don't let the warning label make you fear anything. Now when you get to these elbows, pull back and make sure that you see that there is a green O-ring on the fitting itself before we put them into the unit. That's going to make the seal for you. Now the ones mentioned in the instructions are a 45-degree elbow. The ones that we received in the kit are a 90-degree, as you can see. So at any point you might need to come up with some sort of creative way to kind of route these. So that way you can clear and have something that's reasonable out of the way of the feet, and maybe even out of sight. So we're going to go ahead and play with these and get these configured how we want them. We're using a 27mm wrench to go ahead and tighten up on it. A simple adjustable wrench will be just fine for it if that's what you've got around the house or the shop. So let's go ahead and get these configured, and we'll come back together. All right, back under the hood, you're going to look and you're going to see your two hose lines that's going to come from your heater core. Now, this is going to be your supply hose going into the core. This one is actually the upper elbow that was up there on top of the core. And that way, as this is pushing through, that gravity is going to help kind of keep the cycle going. And then this will be your return line. So if we look down on the engine, the far passenger side, smaller 5/8 inner diameter hose is running down to the front. And it actually comes out of a bypass that's coming through in the water pump housing. So that's going to push the coolant up and through. And as it sets factory, it's going to cycle around and go into your EGR system. So what we're going to do is we're going to tap into that. If you're using the 4-way valve, you're going to just tap into it utilize the new core hoses and then return back to that coolant line going into your EGR. Now, if you're using the single, the two-way unit valve, you're going to just go ahead and you're going to plumb in to your supply, go into your core, and then we're going to route and go all the way back up to the thermostat housing over here, and then continue the cycle of the coolant. So let's go ahead and spend just a moment to actually talk about the valves. We are fortunate to have both valves here on hand. Now, if you look in on the valves real closely, you're going to be able to see arrows indicating the flow of the coolant. Each valve's going to have them, and so that way it'll give you a good idea. Now, the pictures and the instructions are pretty good as well. Now, what we want to do is talk to you guys about the EGR four-way valve. This valve is designed, if you look inside here, there's a little tiny butterfly flap that's going to actually allow the coolant to come in, and that flap, if it's in the closed position, it's going to cut off the coolant from going into your heater core, and it's going to actually cause it to bypass and go straight back to your EGR. So in and then return to your EGR system. As you increase the temperature of the heat inside your heater core, it's going to open that valve and start to allow the coolant to flow into the cabin, into your heater core. And then what it'll end up doing is it'll eventually close off and cycle through at full heat. And then therefore the coolant will have to flow into the cabin through the heater core, return from the heater core, and then since the valve's in this position, it'll push it right back over to the EGR system. So it'll cycle through back to the EGR system. So whenever you're setting up your four-way valve unit, you're going to want to plumb your inlet, your far closest over here to the connector on the module. You're going to go ahead and connect that coming directly from the water pump. And then you're going to supply, if you look at these two holes, if you route them the way we did, the one that's furthest to the back of the cab is going to come off of the one over here towards the center of it. And then you're going to continue the coolant into your heater core. As it's coming back out, grab your other hose. You're going to plumb it into the furthest one away from the control plug. And then with your other hose going back into your EGR, you're going to use the back to the middle on the engine side coming back out. So that's how you're going to set up your four-way valve. Now we're going to do the EGR delete kit. So part of this video, we will do that kit real quickly, showing the EGR delete. And then we're going to show you how this simple two-way valve is going to be installed, coming through and simplifying the process back up to the thermostat. Okay, so when we come back up to the supply line, I want to note something as we work on our install. We're deleting the EGR obviously, so as we hook this up, we wanted to back this line up just enough that we can modify the existing bracket. And then what's going to happen if we go ahead and assemble this real quick for you, we're going to be able to see that this bracket is going to hold on to the new hose coming out of this valve system. And it's going to hold it up and give it a nice stationary placement. And what that's going to do is just stabilize it, and it honestly, I think it's going to have a nice factory look, and everything will look really nice and clean for the client. So if that's a route that you guys can go with, that'd be a great placement there. So we'll go ahead, we'll get this wrapped up, and then we'll show you guys what it looks like when it's done. All right, so what we're going to do is show you guys what we came up with this, all the lines that we'd routed. Again, here's a closer look you can see of the actual valve itself. We did, like I said, coming off the water pump come in. We were able to modify this just enough so that way it holds. We squeeze it down just enough so that way everything's pretty stable, nothing's kinked up. Going into the core, coming out of the core. Now what we want to show you guys is how we routed out this lower line going back in over here to the thermostat housing. So we did go ahead, there was enough soft lining in the kit to route it all the way up. Now that the EGR is gone, you have a pretty good opening that you can see all the way down through there. And so it was a pretty clean install. So as we come to the dash, we're going to go ahead and get the switches installed. Now the plate or the bracket that they've given us, the little panel that you can choose to screw into the base of this, when you line that up, it is a little off center. It doesn't necessarily fit very flush to this. You might try to create some other way of doing it there at your ROXOR to make it set flush. However, we went ahead and we removed all the switches and the little stickers, the little cover stickers that go with it. And we went ahead and we measured out where these holes need to be in comparison to the distance. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put these into the dash itself. It'll give a nice clean factory look, and I think our client will like that. Now, we do want to note that we mic'd these out and they were 1.75, just a little over 1.75 inches apart from one another. This first hole, which is the smaller one, it's the temperature selector. We're going to drill that out to exactly a 5/16 hole. And our second one is going to, these other two we're going to come out to, we're going to put them in with a step bit, and we're going to drill those to 7/16. And then that way you can slide each of those in from the back, putting on the sticker and the retainer nut. Now I'm not going to put these on tight or anything like that. Went ahead and we left these loose for the time being, so that way we can get final positioning once we get all the wiring and everything behind the dash and through the firewall all buttoned up. This way, if we need to get in there, make any changes or modifications to the wiring, these can come out pretty easily. But we hope everything went well for you if this is the way you're doing it at your location. And let's get to the wiring. So before we get too carried away with the wiring, I wanted to get a game plan together before we started shooting the film. Some of these items are going to be kind of obvious, that being you've got this connector here. Looks real close to a trailer plug. It's a 3-wire. That should go right together. Now we did have a little bit of an exposed pin right here, so we went ahead and put a heat shrink on it to help out with weatherproofing. And so once you get that connected, then you can keep moving along. What you want to do is find the ground. We found the next wire to get after was the ground coming off of the actual control module, the box itself that we mounted to the firewall. Find that ground. It's got a little eyelet, and what we did is we took it over here and we made it to the body ground that we used. We used this body ground during our install for the blinker unit. So go ahead, if you've got another body ground that you'd like to use, go with that. We did have to extend it to get it up over the clutch and brake pedal mount. And so do whatever you need to do to get that guy grounded. Now find your long set of wires. It's this bundle of aluminum. It'll be a white connector. And what we did is we went ahead and pulled one of the grommets on the firewall. I'm sorry for such a shaky film here. One of the grommets up here on the firewall. And you're going to want to fish this through and send it up towards the control valve that we installed on top of the engine for the coolant. That's where it's going to plug in. And you're going to be able to get your distance on that, and that way you can kind of consume some of any loose wiring, bundle it up nice and neat under the dash. What we did to kind of prepare for a clean install is we removed all those convenient little white zip ties. They did well for packaging the kit and getting it to us and giving us an idea. But we went ahead and took all those off so we can prepare it for a nice 1/4-inch loom that we're going to put around all this and send through the firewall. Another wire that we're going to send through the firewall is the blue wire. This main blue wire coming off of your selector switch. This guy. So find that large harness coming off of it. Find your blue. Now if you notice, ours is no longer connected to that circuit breaker. Now what we did is it's just a simple little nut. And we know we're going to send that up towards the battery, so we're going to loom it and push it through the firewall, the hole up there. And on this side, if you can see, we've got the breaker that we went ahead, we just did a sheet metal screw, get it into the firewall, and then route that over towards the battery, getting it ready for a connection over there. So like as you can see, we're going to go ahead and pop through the hole on the firewall. We're going to wire everything in a nice neat loom, push it through the grommet, connect to the little circuit breaker with the supply wire, and then connect to our control valve with the white connector. And then everything should look good. So we'll go ahead and keep moving along, and we'll touch base here in a minute. So before we leave the engine and go back into the interior, let's go ahead and just take a final look at it. Hopefully your kit's going to look close to this if this is the way you want to go with it. You got your EGR block offs. You got all the return line and supply line. Got the valve set in there pretty well placed out of the way. Another block off plate down there just at the manifold. So now let's go ahead and go into the cab. We're going to set up the actual defrost ducts, and we'll get that process going. As we move up to the dash, we're going to go ahead and install the actual defrost ducts. To do that, you're going to locate just the edge of the factory roll bar mount as it comes into the dash, and you're going to go ahead and place a tape measure down on that, and you're going to measure out, and you're going to look for the 9 to an 18-inch mark. And then what you're going to do is you're going to lay out some tape. We grab just some painter's tape, and you're going to go ahead and lay that down in there. And we're going to prepare to start to measure out the drilling points that we're going to use, and we'll keep moving through. Your first point of measurement is going to be simply the fastest way we found to do this is go ahead and measure off 1 inch up from the dash itself. Now this is going to be the actual cabin side of the dash panel. So go ahead and measure up exactly 1 inch. And then draw a line all the way across, getting your straight edge in there, and making sure that this line is going to be true to the dash itself. Go ahead and verify that it looks good. If it looks a little crooked, you can maybe go in there and correct it before you start to commit to any holes. So once you get to this point, then it's going to make this a lot easier as we measure off making in our measurement points for those holes. So in the instructions, it does outline a couple measurement points. However, we've discovered that the second set of measuring points for the inner holes was off by 1/4 inch, and we'll show you in just a second what that's about. Your first one, go ahead and bring in off the edge. You're going to come in and measure out 10 3/4 of an inch. And then you're going to go another 1/2 inch in, so go to 11 1/4. And then we're going to go all the way down to the other side, and we're going to measure at 16 inches. And then 16 1/2. Okay, so when you're done, it should look something similar to this. Now, what I mentioned in the instructions, it says to mark off this, let's see, this 10 3/4 hole, and then your 16 1/2 inch hole. Those are for the outer mounts. The outer mounts, these are going to be the small screws that are going to be out here holding this duct up into the dash itself. So those are correct. Where we found a little bit of variance is that in the instructions it said on this outer measurement to come in to 16 1/4. Well, if you do that, let's say it's there, when you go to drill out that 3/8 hole, you're going to be impeding on this outer mounting hole. And then if you line this up with your duct itself, you're going to end up coming very far out here close to this hole, and it's going to be off. So come in, like we said over here, measure it to the 16 point mark, the 16 inch mark, and that'll make sure when you drill that 3/8 hole, it'll line right up here with the edge, and everything will look good out here. So let's go ahead and get these drilled out. The first holes that we're going to drill are the outer holes, and those are going to be a 9, make sure I got this right here. What we're using is a 9/64 bit. So that's going to be one that we just lined up with the screws itself. It doesn't identify anything in the instructions for you in specific. Just take the screws that we're going to use, line them up, and find a drill bit that you might have that's pretty decent lineup. As always, if you have a centering punch, it'll make this a lot easier. That way your bit doesn't walk around on you. Go ahead and just give those all a nice good punch. There's the fender washer we were looking for earlier. Now, if you notice, we did take off the windshield. We went ahead and set that forward. We have it held up at the time momentarily. What we're going to allow us to do is to work in here, not run into anything if the drill catches, depending on the type of drill that you're using. If it's a long handle drill, similar to something like this, if it catches and rounds over, you're going to run a risk of damaging your glass. So we found it easier just to go ahead and get this out of the way. We do have a low profile drill that we're using, but even when we start to get in here and cut and join these inner holes, we're going to find it a lot easier with this glass, the windshield itself, just being out of the way. It was really easy to take off, so if you're looking at doing the project, that might be a quick, simple step for yourself. Now, to get this inner hole started, we're going to go ahead and still use this 9/64 bit and get that going. So that way, when we step up to the 3/8 bit, it's got a very much aligned hole, and it'll make this process a lot smoother. Just room for less error as you move up to that larger hole. Now at this point, when we go to mark off these holes and draw off the outer perimeter as we connect these two 3/8 holes, we're going to go ahead and pull off this tape. That way we get a very good sight line of what's going on in here. As you can see, it's a much cleaner view that you can have when you're lining up your holes, when you're drawing out that straight line. So go ahead and grab your straight edge, and all you're going to do is just come up from top, join the two holes, and then grab a cutoff tool of your choice and go ahead and join them. So, once we get done with that cutout, go ahead and use a flat file. I call this move double the trouble. And clean that up, make sure the edge is really nice and smooth. If you want to cut just a little to the inside, that way as your cutoff disc or your material is going to be taken out, you can then meet up to the etched surface of those holes, the 3/8 holes. So again, once you're done, finish that out. We use a high flow paint pen. This is just a simple paint pen that you can find pretty much any auto parts store. And what you're going to do is you're going to just go in there and line up any of the bare metal edges that you see and get them painted up so that way it prevents any future rust. Once you're done with that part, you're going to want to grab the actual duct itself, reach in down there from the bottom, and just make sure everything looks good. Again, we've already done this before. We started to go ahead and commit to the paint, but reach in there, and then you're going to go ahead and throw the screws in from the top, hitting these two little holes, and this side will be done. Now, once we got this installed, we did want to go ahead and note out for you guys that are doing the install yourself. You're going to be using the vent itself. Now, what we did is we installed the flex line duct onto the vent, and we secured it a little high up. And we secured it with the large zip tie just below the actual little knob here and this lower little catch lip. So once you get that on there and zip tied down, you'll be able to make sure it's got a nice seal all the way around, and then go ahead and fish, or I guess hand that up through, and then guide your screws and get it plumbed in. That wraps up the install of this heater for the ROXOR. We hope that the video was something helpful for you guys. A couple takeaway points we want to bring out is simply the fact that the hardest part of the job, in our opinion, was getting that control module, the entire heater head, down up under the dash and against the firewall, lining up those holes, and just having to lay down on the floorboard and work up there, getting those hard to access points. The wiring was pretty straightforward as well. The kit does come with some schematics that you guys can use. However, we did notice that on the mode selector, the stickers were actually the inverse of what the switch was doing. We did probe around and test through and noticed that the power was coming in as it should. However, the output power was actually flipped. So we had to flip a couple wires on the mode selector switch, so that way the defrost, this matched up to the defrost only, the foot with the foot, and then of course the blend with the defrost and foot. That way they all matched up on that switch. Outside of that, there wasn't really any hiccups. Just make sure when you're putting the defrost ducts in the dash, you pick the right holes and pre-measure that out to make sure it's going to fit good. And then, of course, once you get done, the last thing you want to do is always power it up. Make sure you're grounded underneath the dash, and then go ahead and power it up before you start trying to play with anything else or check anything out on the install. So again, we hope this was helpful. Please visit dirtlegal.com for your needs on this heater kit. If you have any other needs, check them out as well. We'll be featuring a few other products in future videos, so make sure you subscribe, stay tuned, and give this video a like.
Double the trouble.